am not sure how to start. I met Chloe at a time when everything seemed simple. She had this quiet, gentle charm about her that made me feel at ease. I never had to chase her, she was just there. Her love felt like the steady beat of a heart, reliable and unwavering. Our marriage, our little family, our son Martin. It was everything I had ever wanted. We'd been married for 7 years. I worked hard, long hours, at a job I didn't love, but I loved what I did for us. Chloe didn't mind. She loved being at home with Martin, making sure he was taken care of. We had a rhythm, a routine. She kept the house perfect, clean, warm, inviting. Martin's laughter echoed through the halls. Our dog, Max, was always wagging his tail in the corner. Life was good. Too good, maybe. I didn't need much else. I was a simple guy, quiet, introverted. I'd spend my evenings unwinding with a book or gaming on the console. Chloe would join me sometimes, but most of the time, she would curl up on the couch, knitting or watching her shows. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. We never argued. There were the usual annoyances here and there, but we communicated well. Or so I thought. When Robert got out of prison, I knew I had to help him. He's my brother after all. It wasn't like we were close, we never really had that bond. Robert always stood out, he was the one everyone liked, the golden boy, the athletic one. I was just Michael. The guy who liked his books and video games, who avoided conflict. Robert had been in for 3 years. I never asked about the details of his arrest, some things are better left unsaid, but I knew it was time for him to get back on his feet. So, I offered him a place to stay, knowing that Chloe would be a little uncomfortable. She never liked Robert much. He was always so different. But Chloe's heart was big, and she understood what family meant. When he arrived, Robert's energy filled the house. He was charismatic, outgoing, and everywhere he went, he drew attention. His muscles were sculpted like something out of a magazine, his smile disarming. He immediately hit it off with Martin, playing catch in the yard, teaching him new sports tricks. I stayed in the background, watching them. Meanwhile, Chloe seemed oddly happy to have him around. Robert helped her with chores, and they'd talk for hours in the kitchen, discussing things like fitness, food, and travel. I remember the first time I saw them laughing together. It felt natural, almost too natural. I didn't think much of it at first. He was just my brother, and Chloe was just being kind. But in the back of my mind, something shifted. It wasn't jealousy, it was something else, something I couldn't name yet. Days turned into weeks, and Robert became a permanent fixture in our home. He was always up early, working out in the garage, doing push-ups, running, or hitting the gym. It was like he had an endless supply of energy. Chloe, on the other hand, would be in the kitchen, making breakfast, or taking care of Martin. She'd tell me how she was trying a new recipe Robert had mentioned or how he'd given her some tips on her own fitness routine. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'm not an active person, and Chloe had never been either until Robert showed up. She was doing more yoga, running in the mornings with him, even going to the gym. I wasn't upset. After all, she was taking care of herself. I supported that. But the more I saw them together, the more I noticed how they shared these moments, private jokes, glances that lingered just a little too long, laughter that felt like something I wasn't part of. Sometimes, I'd come home after a long day, and there they'd be, sitting together on the couch, chatting about something in a way that made me feel like I was intruding. Their connection was easy, natural, something I didn't have with Chloe anymore. It started small, like when Chloe mentioned how strong Robert was or how he helped her with things I never bothered with. She was proud of him, I could tell. But the small things began to add up. Little touches here and there. The way Robert would laugh at her jokes just a little too loudly. The way Chloe would smile when he walked into the room, as if her whole face lit up. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was overthinking. Chloe was just being nice, right? But deep down, I knew I couldn't just brush it off. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home early to find Chloe and Robert in the kitchen. Robert had just finished cooking a new dish for dinner, something he had picked up during his time in prison, he claimed. Chloe was smiling, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her hands busy setting the table. But there was something in her eyes, a glint that I hadn't seen before. It was the way she looked at him. The way she leaned in to taste the food from his spoon, laughing at how perfect it was. I stood there for a moment, unnoticed, just watching them. My mind screamed at me to leave, to go back to my office, to escape this moment, but I stayed frozen. Something was happening between them, something I couldn't explain. Robert caught my eye and gave me a quick smile, but Chloe didn't even look at me. She just kept talking to him, her attention fixed on him in a way that made my chest tighten. It wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, but it was the first time I couldn't ignore it. I should have said something. I should have asked what was going on, but I didn't. I just sat down at the table, trying to pretend everything was fine. Dinner was awkward. Too quiet. Robert kept making small talk, but Chloe didn't seem to want to talk to me. Her responses were short, distant. It was as if I was an afterthought there, but not really part of the conversation. Later that night, when we were getting ready for bed, I tried to bring it up. I asked Chloe how her day had been, but she seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact. She mentioned she was tired and just wanted to sleep. But I could feel the wall she had put up between us, even as she lay next to me in bed. I wanted to reach out, to pull her back, but I didn't know how. She was slipping away, and I couldn't stop it. The cracks in our relationship were becoming more visible, and all I could do was watch them spread. At work, I threw myself into projects, keeping busy, trying to avoid the thoughts creeping into my mind. But even then, I couldn't escape them. The whispers of doubt. The little moments I caught between Chloe and Robert. I didn't want to believe it, but my mind kept going back to the same place. Could they be? But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed more proof. I needed something I could hold on to, something that would give me the courage to face her. But the more time I spent looking for it, the more I saw things I couldn't ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. It was subtle, but relentless. Every time I looked at Chloe, I saw someone I didn't fully recognize. The distance between us had grown, but she didn't seem to care. Was I imagining it? Was I overreacting? I wanted to believe I was, but my instincts told me something was wrong. It wasn't just the late-night workouts Robert had started, or the long, quiet walks he'd take with Chloe while I was working. It was the way they communicated now, those little inside jokes, those shared smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. It seemed innocent, even sweet at first, but I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper. Chloe was becoming someone else when Robert was around, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started, but I knew I wasn't part of it anymore. Chloe still made time for Martin, still kept the house in order, but there was a coldness between us. She was distracted. Her eyes didn't linger on me like they used to. She didn't seem excited to see me when I came home. And when I tried to engage her in conversation, she was often distant, offering only half-hearted responses. I tried to push the thoughts away. I reminded myself that I was busy with work. Maybe it was stress. Maybe she was stressed. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about work. There was something else, something I was too afraid to face. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Chloe and Robert were sitting together on the couch, talking in low voices. They didn't hear me at first, so I stood there, just out of their sight, and watched. Chloe laughed at something Robert said, an easy, carefree laugh. Her head tilted back, and for a split second, she seemed completely lost in him. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A flood of emotions rushed through me: betrayal, anger, confusion. Why couldn't she laugh like that with me? Why did he have this power over her? I cleared my throat, and they both turned. Chloe's face instantly shifted, and Robert gave me a tight smile, the kind that felt too practiced, too rehearsed. "Hey, Michael," Robert said, standing up and patting me on the back. "You're home early. How was work?" But I couldn't focus on his words. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. "Good," I said, my voice thick with something I couldn't control. I couldn't even bring myself to say more. I didn't want to argue in front of Martin, but I could feel the walls closing in. That night, when we were alone in bed, I reached for her. I needed to feel close to her, to remind myself of what we used to have. But Chloe turned her back to me, pretending to sleep. At work, I felt the coldness of her rejection, and it crushed me, trying to avoid the thoughts creeping into my mind. But even then, I couldn't escape them. The whispers of doubt. The little moments I caught between Chloe and Robert. I didn't want to believe it, but my mind kept going back to the same place. Could they be? But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed more proof. I needed something I could hold on to, something that would give me the courage to face her. But the more time I spent looking for it, the more I saw things I couldn't ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. It was subtle, but relentless. Every time I looked at Chloe, I saw someone I didn't fully recognize. The distance between us had grown, but she didn't seem to care. Was I imagining it? Was I overreacting? I wanted to believe I was, but my instincts told me something was wrong. It wasn't just the late-night workouts Robert had started, or the long, quiet walks he'd take with Chloe while I was working. It was the way they communicated now, those little inside jokes, those shared smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. It seemed innocent, even sweet at first, but I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper. Chloe was becoming someone else when Robert was around, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started, but I knew I wasn't part of it anymore. Chloe still made time for Martin, still kept the house in order, but there was a coldness between us. She was distracted. Her eyes didn't linger on me like they used to. She didn't seem excited to see me when I came home. And when I tried to engage her in conversation, she was often distant, offering only half-hearted responses. I tried to push the thoughts away. I reminded myself that I was busy with work. Maybe it was stress. Maybe she was stressed. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about work. There was something else, something I was too afraid to face. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Chloe and Robert were sitting together on the couch, talking in low voices. They didn't hear me at first, so I stood there, just out of their sight, and watched. Chloe laughed at something Robert said, an easy, carefree laugh. Her head tilted back, and for a split second, she seemed completely lost in him. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A flood of emotions rushed through me: betrayal, anger, confusion. Why couldn't she laugh like that with me? Why did he have this power over her? I cleared my throat, and they both turned. Chloe's face instantly shifted, and Robert gave me a tight smile, the kind that felt too practiced, too rehearsed. "Hey, Michael," Robert said, standing up and patting me on the back. "You're home early. How was work?" But I couldn't focus on his words. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. "Good," I said, my voice thick with something I couldn't control. I couldn't even bring myself to say more. I didn't want to argue in front of Martin, but I could feel the walls closing in. That night, when we were alone in bed, I reached for her. I needed to feel close to her, to remind myself of what we used to have. But Chloe turned her back to me, pretending to sleep. I felt the coldness of her rejection, and it crushed me. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. My gut was telling me everything I needed to know, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was a Sunday. I was cleaning out some old papers from my office when I found something. A message. An innocuous-looking text from Robert to Chloe, sent late at night when I thought we were all asleep. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'm counting the days until I can hold you again. Love you." I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. I read it again and again, as if trying to convince myself it was some sort of mistake. But the more I read it, the clearer it became. There was no mistake. I had been blind. Chloe hadn't been avoiding me because of work. She had been avoiding me because she had chosen Robert. I didn't know what to do. My whole world felt like it was collapsing in on me. I couldn't even speak when I confronted Chloe. I just showed her the message. Her face went pale as she looked at the screen, and then at me. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain. She just broke down. She admitted it. The affair. She had been seeing Robert behind my back for weeks, months maybe. Their secret meetings, their whispered conversations. She had fallen in love with him, and I had been too blind to see it. The rage inside me burned so hot, I thought I might explode. But instead of yelling, instead of letting her see how much I was hurting, I just left. I didn't say a word. I grabbed my things and walked out. The house that had once been my home felt like a stranger's. I couldn't stand being there, couldn't stand being around her, knowing what she had done. I didn't know what to do after that. I left the house, went to a friend's apartment, and stayed there for a while. I couldn't face Chloe, couldn't face Robert. I couldn't face the fact that they had betrayed me, not just as a husband, but as a brother. I felt like everything had been ripped away from me. I didn't reach out to Chloe, didn't respond to her calls. She sent me dozens of messages, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't even look at her. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to burn with anger, but there was something else, something deeper. I felt hollow. Empty. Like everything I had worked for had been stolen from me without warning. Robert was still living in my house, the house I had worked so hard to build for us. Every time I thought of it, the pain became unbearable. He had crossed a line that I could never forgive. I tried to go back to work, to focus on something, anything, but nothing felt the same. I didn't have the energy to care anymore. I didn't want to be the guy who was left behind, who was ignored in favor of his own brother. The worst part? Chloe didn't fight for me. She didn't come after me. She didn't beg me to stay. She had already made her choice. And Robert? He was still in my house, still with her, and that was the final wound. It felt like everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was collapsing in on itself. My heart weighed 1,000 pounds, and I couldn't seem to find air in my lungs. How had we gotten here? How had everything, my marriage, my family, my brother, crumbled so quickly? I hadn't spoken to Chloe in days. She kept calling, texting, trying to apologize, to beg for my forgiveness. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. There was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. That morning, as I sat alone in my small apartment, my phone buzzed again. It was Chloe. She was insisting on meeting me, said she couldn't take it anymore, that we needed to talk. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her suffer as I had been suffering. But the other part, the part that still loved her, wanted answers. I agreed to meet her. When I arrived at the small cafe she had chosen, I could barely look at her. The woman who had once been my everything, the woman who had stood by my side through thick and thin, was sitting in front of me, looking like a stranger. She had a tear-streaked face, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." But the words meant nothing to me. I couldn't hear them. All I could think about was the hurt she had caused, the way she had thrown away our life, our family, our love for him. Robert. My own brother. "Don't," I said, my voice a cold whisper, barely holding back the rage that was bubbling inside me. "I don't need your apology. What's done is done." Her eyes filled with tears as she reached out to grab my hand. "Please, Michael. I love you. I made a huge mistake. I was lost. I don't know what happened to me, but it's over. I swear, it's over. I need you. I need my family." The words hit me like a slap. She was telling me everything I had wanted to hear, everything I had hoped she would say, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I pulled my hand away from hers. "You don't love me," I said quietly, as the truth hit me like a wave. "You love him. You've been in love with him for a long time. You just couldn't admit it to yourself." Chloe's face crumpled, and she broke down, crying. "Please, don't say that. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just did." I couldn't listen to her anymore. The rage inside me was boiling over, and I stood up suddenly, knocking my chair back. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make her understand the pain she had caused, but all I could do was walk away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The truth was clear now. Chloe had made her choice, and it wasn't me. She had chosen Robert. When I got back to the apartment, I felt like a hollow shell of a man. The world felt so empty, so cold. I wanted to break something, to make the pain stop, but there was no escape. There was no way to fix this. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, feeling the weight of the betrayal like a physical ache. I couldn't believe I had ever been so blind, so stupid, to think that things would stay the same forever. The days after that meeting were like a blur. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life from a distance, unable to believe what was happening. Chloe had gone to stay with Robert. Of course, she had. She had left our home, our family, without a second thought. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't reach out to anyone. I couldn't. I couldn't bear to face the people who had destroyed me. Robert and Chloe were together, living in the house I had worked so hard for. I couldn't be in that house anymore. I couldn't walk through the rooms where I had built a life with her, where I had watched our son grow. Everything had been tainted. The hardest part was looking at Martin, our son. He didn't understand why I wasn't coming home. He didn't understand why Mommy was with Uncle Robert now, why Daddy wasn't there to tuck him into bed anymore. It crushed me to see the confusion in his eyes. I tried to explain, tried to tell him that everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow. I wasn't sure if I believed them myself. One evening, when I finally got the courage to pack up the rest of my things, I was in the house alone. The place felt empty without her. Without them. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the bed we had once shared. The memories hit me like a freight train, and the anger rose inside me again. How could she do this? How could she betray me so completely, so utterly? I had given her everything. I had trusted her, loved her. And she had chosen him. I grabbed a few boxes, shoved my things into them, and took one last look around. The silence of the house was deafening. There was no laughter anymore. No warmth. No life. As I walked out the door for the final time, I felt like I was leaving behind a part of myself, leaving behind a version of me that had believed in love, in loyalty, in family. I was no longer that man. I couldn't be. I had been broken by the people I loved the most. The betrayal was deep, and though time would heal the wounds, I knew I would never forget this feeling. I would never forget the man I had been, the husband I had been, the father I had been, and how all of it had been destroyed by the one person I had trusted most. But maybe that was the hardest part to swallow. The hardest part was knowing that Chloe didn't care. That Robert didn't care. They had each other, and I had nothing. I walked out into the night, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever find peace again. But one thing I do know, for the first time in a long time, I was finally alone. And maybe that was for the best.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gabby's Cheating Stories. See you on the next one.